I was standing outside the closed church, smelling the metallic smell of rain coming off the heated asphalt, when his message came, as short as a verdict. "Mother, don't come." The sound of my heart was a muffled drum in my chest, and for a moment the air seemed to cut my nostrils like wet glass. I could hear, in the distance, the test bells of the sacristy, and closer, the rumble of my old car, tired like me, as I tried to decide whether to obey or walk through that door to remind everyone that that groom had a past only I knew. The first thing I felt was the taste of cold coffee rising in my mouth, a sign of the old nervousness that has haunted me since the early morning hours when I found our kitchen door ajar and a note with smudged ink. Some truths deserve silence. Since then, I've been collecting sounds: the creaking of the house at night, the howl of the broken fan, the insistent ringing of unknown numbers, like someone collecting invisible evidence of a crime that hasn't yet happened. I leaned against the steering wheel and closed my eyes, seeing, as if in a neighborhood movie theater, the image of my son as a small child, his knees scraped, his wide eyes begging me to trust him. And I also heard my own voice, the one now, hoarse and tired, asking why, after all, I deserved to be banished from the most important day of his life. When I opened my eyes, a bolt of lightning narrowed the sky into a cruel white, and the windshield vibrated like a drumhead. The scent in the air changed to something electric, almost sweet, and at the same time I remembered the lavender perfume the bride had been wearing when I met her, a fragrance that gave me a headache and a chill I couldn't explain. "Don't come" could mean many things: shame, protection, threat. In our case, I already knew what the most dangerous option was, and it had to do with his father and what happened before our last Christmas. The passenger seat was covered in a red folder with loose elastic bands, each flap holding newspaper clippings, email printouts, crumpled copies of reports no one ever asked me for, but which I, in my sleepless nights, gathered together like someone knitting a coat for a winter that promises to be harsher than all the previous ones. Inside were underlined dates, crossed-out names, arrows connecting lies to addresses, and, on the last flap, a card with 4 hastily scrawled numbers without the area code, as if fear had shortened the world. I touched the folder with my fingertips, as if touching a covered wound, and took a deep breath to keep from crying. The rain began in earnest, heavy and rusty-smelling, tapping on the neighboring metalwork like impatient fingers. And I found myself in a grey aquarium, floating while outside people ran with ceremony programs over their heads, laughing loudly, unaware that laughter is also a curtain where secrets are hidden. No, I wasn't there to ruin the wedding. I was there to prevent the past from sitting in the front row, in the seat reserved for a mother who, despite everything, still believes she can save her son from himself. In the rearview mirror, a figure appeared and disappeared. A black umbrella, very large, very sturdy, like a movable roof held by hands that knew what they were doing. I tried to capture the face, but the water distorted everything, turning the street into a painting someone had scrubbed with solvent. Still, there was something familiar about that dark form. A sure walk. The slight tilt of the head as it skirted. Puddles! And for a moment I swore it was the same man I'd seen in front of our house 3 weeks earlier, the night the lights flickered and I'd found the gate ajar. My phone vibrated again, but this time the name that appeared on the screen wasn't my son's. It was unidentified. The ringing echoed through the car like a pendulum, marking the end of a deadline, and I answered with bated breath, my ear scraping against the cold plastic of the phone, ready to hear that particular tone, the one that has haunted me ever since. My son's father disappeared between a goodbye and a broken promise. On the other end, silence first, then a whisper ripped by electricity, "If you come in, someone falls." The sentence hung, ownerless, and the call ended with a click that made me think of mousetraps. I didn't hang up the phone, just lowered my hand slowly, feeling the weight of the threat scratch my skin like rough wool. What does a mother do when she's forbidden to remind her groom that he was once a boy and that his scars haven't disappeared just because the party is beautiful? I wanted to rush in, grab the celebrant's microphone, and confess everything. The fear, the nights of anonymous letters, the trail of strange numbers. But I also knew that certain confessions light matches in a wet barn. They don't put out the fire, they just spread the smoke. That's when I saw, in the back seat, the white ribbon, a piece of tulle I hadn't even remembered putting there. It was wrapped in a manila envelope, and on the back, in handwriting, I recognized with my heart, before I recognized it with my eyes, was written, "For you, Mom. Open when it hurts." It hurt in that instant, as if the envelope were a hot stone in my hands, and my fingers trembled as they slid under the flap, tearing the paper with the care of someone handling relics or bombs. Inside was an old Polaroid photo, yellowed at the edges. He and I, my 6-year-old boy, sitting on the steps of our first house, our hands smeared with blue paint, smiling at something just outside the frame. On the back, a date, October 3rd, and a short sentence. "It was never just you." The words blew through me like wind blowing out a candle, and for a second I could smell gouache paint again, taste buttery cookies, hear his laughter ringing like crystal bells. It was never just you. What had that meant to me that day, on that doorstep, at that wedding? I caught myself glancing back at the rearview mirror, expecting the black umbrella to materialize with a face, a scar, any sign that would connect me to the pile of clippings in the red folder. Instead, I saw my own mouth, a hard line, and my eyes with that salty sheen that appears when a canyon opens beneath our feet. I remembered the words of the therapist I'd seen for 6 sessions before giving up. "You look for patterns because you want control, but sometimes patterns are just coincidences dressed up as meaning." I never believed him. Coincidences are lazy explanations. In the glove compartment was a wad of napkins from the gas station where I'd stopped for gas. On one of them, hastily scrawled, were 3 numbers, 5:30 p.m., side yard, service exit. I didn't remember writing them, but I recognized my handwriting, that thick M, the 7 with a dash in the middle. When had I decided that if I couldn't get in through the front door, I'd try the side door? Was it after the "don't come" note? Was it after the first threat? Or was it when I realized that my presence was, in itself, proof that the story wasn't over yet? The dashboard clock read 5:12 p.m., and the sound of the rain now mingled with the trill of wet birds finding shelter in the gutters. The wind sped through the cracks like a messenger in distress. The wedding, according to the invitation I'd read so many times I'd memorized the typography, would be at 5:30 p.m. Time, which some days is like a stretchy blanket, was now a tight noose around my neck. I took a deep breath and turned on the hazard lights, a stubborn metronome beating in my ear. Stay, go, stay, go. I opened the red folder and pulled out a newspaper clipping, the oldest, already with its corners chewed. "Businessman disappears after donation scandal." The photo was of an elegant man with the same umbrella-carrying walk I'd just seen, the same slightly tilted neck, the same smile that never reached his eyes. The article was stained with coffee and anger, and I'd underlined a paragraph, with a pen that had misfired several times. Last person to see him was a dark-haired woman, unidentified. "I know who she is," I thought, and a thin chill ran down my spine. The brake squealed as I took my foot off the accelerator, and that sound reminded me of something else. The early morning my son came home with a pale face and a look drenched in guilt, clutching in his pocket a ring too simple for a boy who had never been simple. "Mom," he said, "there are things I can't explain to you now." I kissed his warm forehead and didn't ask, because sometimes love is a pact of silence, and other times silence is a knife we hold by the blade, bleeding without realizing it. On my phone screen, an old notification flashed, lost among the new. Reservation confirmed. Posada Alvarado, Suite 14, 10-3. The same date as the back of the Polaroid. I didn't recognize the inn. The name brought back a scent of damp wood, of crushed leaves on the floor. Who made the reservation? Why? I tapped the message, and it opened like a shadowy corridor, revealing details I didn't want to see. Arrival for 2, request for silence at check-in, payment in cash. I felt my saliva thicken, and an old flash came on. 10-3, the day his father disappeared. A clap of thunder ripped the sky open, and reflexively, my hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. It was then that I heard, very clearly, a distinct, short, insistent tap, someone tapping on the driver's side window. I turned my head slowly with that slow-motion motion and saw a face partially obscured by the umbrella's brim. It wasn't the elegant man in the article, nor the father of my child, nor a complete stranger. It was the bride. She was alone, soaked, her eyes lined with what might have been runny makeup or pure fear, and her mouth moved words that the rain swallowed. I rolled down the window a couple of inches, enough for the lavender scent to invade the car like a living animal. Her voice came in with it, cutting through the rain. "He'll call." I stared at the phone, as if it might magically guess the command and ring. "Who him?" I asked, and she swallowed hard, her heavy eyelashes fluttering. "Your son," she said. "Before the wedding march. You need to hear it." My stomach dropped, like the first step of a steep staircase, and I waited for her to explain, but she just repeated, this time more quietly, "You need to hear it." The bride stared at me for a second longer than necessary, and in that second I saw, or wanted to see, an apology, a plea for help, and something that looked like regret. But maybe it was just tears in her eyes. Then she stepped back, clutched her umbrella against the storm, and ran toward the side door, the same one noted on my napkin. I stood there with my mouth half open, the scent of lavender lingering on my tongue, and the sound of my hazard lights signaling choices I wasn't ready to make. I picked up the phone and pressed the side button, the screen illuminating my hands, like an interrogation lamp. No ID had called twice in less than 5 minutes. My son, not once. The battery was at 19%. The mental needle of my fear spun another circle, as if searching for north in a messy magnetic field. I smiled to myself, a short, crooked smile, remembering the day he taught me to silence calls from strange numbers. Ironies are fate's favorite thorns. A silver car parked 2 spaces ahead, and a man in a dark suit got out, holding a small bouquet, not a bridal bouquet, but a condolence bouquet. I felt a superstitious shiver, as if the universe had mixed up events and sent flowers to the wrong ceremony. He looked around, assessed the rain, and entered through the same side door the bride had just used, without looking back. I closed my eyes for a moment and prayed, not to God, but to chance, to give me a sign that didn't feel like a maze. The signal came as it does for those who already expect it. The phone vibrated. A video call, my son's name in clear letters, a thumbnail of his face blurred by the compression of the signal and the haste I exerted in swiping my finger. I answered with my heart in my throat, and the entire car seemed to lean into the screen. The image took a second to stabilize, and in that second I swore I saw, behind it, a crooked picture frame, an open window, and the shadow of someone who shouldn't have been there. "Mom," he said, his voice a jumble of 20 years of unspoken things. "Listen to me calmly." Just then, a bolt of lightning cut the sound in half, and his face swayed in tiny squares that recombined into boyish and manly expressions, like a shuffled deck of cards. "I had to ask you that," he continued, and then the screen froze, crystallizing a look I hadn't seen since the day he'd asked me not to call the police. The rain outside seemed to clap its hands. I swallowed my fear and spoke, in the strongest voice I could muster. "I hear you." For a moment, nothing, just his breathing and the echo of the emptiness between us. Then, short, knife-edged words. 310, Suite 14, Alvarado. I sat back as if punched in the gut. The date, the place, the suite, the Polaroid, the note, the clipping, everything aligned not as a comfort but as a pointed gun. And before I could ask anything, the line ended completely, leaving a reflection of my own face on the screen, a woman on the brink of a marriage that isn't hers, on the brink of a secret that was never just hers. I turned off my hazard lights, breathed in the lavender scent that insisted on refusing to go away, and placed the red briefcase on the passenger seat like someone sitting an old friend next to me. It was 5:26 p.m. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't yet the front door nor the side door. It was something else. Follow the thread he'd left for me. The thread that began at an inn named after a tree and ended, where? At an altar, a police station, a cemetery. The steering wheel was cold under my hands, and I gripped it until fear became a focus. I turned the key. The engine responded with a resigned roar, and the wiper blades swept the windshield with renewed vigor, as if they, too, wanted to see the road ahead. The gear engaged with a click that felt like a final decision, and I, who had been forbidden from entering my own son's wedding, backed out of the parking space slowly, measuring every inch, as if the asphalt were a minefield where every choice could be the step that detonates or the step that saves. The story I knew had just begun to tell itself. The drive to Alvarado Inn felt longer than any road I'd ever traveled, even though it was only a 40-minute drive. The heavy rain turned the headlights of other vehicles into blurry taillights, and each clap of thunder seemed to push my heart into my stomach. The windshield wipers squealed in an irregular rhythm, and the red folder in the passenger seat vibrated with every curve, as if to remind me that the past was traveling with me, exacting a toll I couldn't yet fathom. With every mile, I mentally reviewed the pieces of the puzzle. The mysterious note, the Polaroid with the phrase, "It was never just you," the reservation in Suite 14, the garbled phone call from my son. Everything converged on the same date, the same place. It was as if the coincidences had finally tired of pretending and were now laying themselves bare, revealing the face of a truth I didn't want to see. And the worst part was the silence between the flashes, that heavy interval where I could hear only my own breathing and the doubt that I was walking straight into a trap. On the radio, which I never turned on, a sudden hiss interrupted the silence, and a random station began playing an old song, a bolero my husband liked to whistle while sanding wood on the porch. My hand instinctively went to the off button, but I hesitated. The melody felt like a message, as if the past had found a secret channel to speak to me. "He'll call," the bride had said. But what if this song was just the first call, a camouflaged warning? The road narrowed, flanked by dark pine trees that swayed in the wind, turning the path into a kind of living tunnel. The smell of wet resin filled the car, bringing back memories of family camping trips when my son still believed in ghost stories I'd made up just to make him laugh. Now I was the character in the haunting itself, guided by clues left by a flesh-and-blood ghost. My fingers were rigid on the steering wheel when I realized a dark car, perhaps black or navy blue, had been following me since leaving town. At every turn, it maintained the same distance, like a disciplined shadow. It didn't accelerate, didn't slow down, just kept going. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, the reflection of the headlights outlined the outline of something hanging from the inside mirror of their car. a metal crucifix that swung, reflecting silver flashes. That crucifix struck me like a dormant memory. There had been one just like it in my husband's car years ago, before he disappeared. It was impossible to make out details in the rain, but that silvery glow seemed to mock me, reminding me that no one truly vanishes without leaving an echo. Cold sweat trickled down the back of my neck, plastering my hair to my skin, and I took a deep breath, trying to believe that maybe it was just coincidence. But in my world, coincidences were always excuses. The Alvarado Inn loomed like a shadow among the trees, its wooden facade illuminated by yellowish lights that flickered in the storm. I parked on the side of the road, leaving the engine running, watching the reflection of the reception desk. In the wet windshield, the car following me slowed down, stopped a few meters ahead, and stood there motionless, its headlights on like eyes that refused to blink. I felt exposed, a piece in a shop window. The clock read 6:05 p.m. The wedding should have started by now. Perhaps the wedding march had already played. But my son wasn't there, or at least part of him wasn't. He had led me here, and I needed to find out why. I clutched the briefcase to my chest, breathed in the smell of old paper mixed with mildew, and opened the car door. The rain fell on me, like a wall, plastering my blouse to my body and washing away any remaining hesitation. The reception area was nearly deserted. Only a woman in uniform sat boredly staring at a computer screen while drumming her fingers on the wood. The room smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. When I approached, she looked up and smiled automatically, but that smile faded when she heard the word Suite 14. Reserved, she replied too quickly, almost as a defensive reflex. I persisted, showing her the confirmation on my phone screen. Her eyes slid from the screen to my face, and I saw a flicker of recognition, as if I was someone she'd heard before in stories that shouldn't be repeated. "Who else is in this suite?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, and the silence between us was filled with the metallic sound of distant lightning. "I can't reveal any guests," she replied, but her look betrayed more than her words. Before I could press further, the landline at the front desk rang. The sharp sound cut through the air, and she quickly answered. She looked at me with an expression that mixed fear and complicity and said, "It's for you." My heart raced. I picked up the receiver with trembling hands, the plastic cold against my skin. On the other end, a heavy silence, followed by a heavy breathing I would recognize anywhere. "Mom!" My son's voice came distorted, as if passing through a glass wall. "You need to see what's in here." "Inside Suite 14? I asked breathlessly. He didn't answer right away. Only a sound like furniture scraping echoed through the receiver. Then softly he added, "Don't trust anyone, not even her." The dry click ended the call, and the silence returned, more cruel than before. I handed over the phone slowly, trying to compose my expression, but the receptionist was already looking away, as if she'd witnessed something forbidden. I felt there was no point in pressing her any further. The truth I sought wasn't there at the counter, but behind the door marked 14. I walked through the narrow hallway, the walls decorated with paintings of bucolic landscapes that seemed almost mocking, the tension crushing me. Each footstep echoed on the wooden floor, mingling with the creaking of the trees outside and the pounding of my own heart. The dim light from the lamps trembled in the wind, casting long shadows that seemed to follow me like invisible witnesses. When I finally stopped before the door to Suite 14, I realized it was only ajar, not locked. A line of light escaped through the gap, pulsing with the shadows of movement within. I gripped the handle with the same reverence as someone touching a sacred object or a bomb about to explode. The scent of lavender was in the air again, stronger than ever, mixed with something metallic I recognized immediately. Blood. My entire body shivered, and in that instant I understood there was no turning back. Whatever was behind that door had the power to redefine not only my son's marriage, but our entire history. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a second, and slowly pushed the door open, hearing the prolonged creak heralding my entrance. Like a dark prelude, what I saw first was not a body or a face, but a disturbing detail. On the table, carefully lined up, was a second red folder, identical to mine, with the elastic loose and yellowed papers spilling out of the edges. And in that moment, I knew someone had been collecting our lives as much as I had. The sight of the second red folder on the table paralyzed me so much that even the sound of the rain seemed to fade for a few seconds. It was as if the entire world had held its breath along with me. That harmless object carried an overwhelming, symbolic weight. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was a meticulous replica of my own obsession. I approached slowly, my soaked shoes leaving dark marks on the wooden floor, each step echoing like an unavoidable verdict. As I reached out to touch the loose elastic of the folder, I realized the tremor wasn't just coming from my fingers, but also from the doorknob itself, still open behind me. I closed it slowly, hearing the click that sealed my fate inside that room. The air was tinged with lavender, but there was also a ferrous note, betraying the presence of something much darker. As I opened the folder, the first document fell to the floor, and the snap of dry paper sounded like a silent gunshot. I bent down to pick up the sheet and felt my stomach turn. It was a grainy black and white photo of my son getting into a car I didn't recognize, accompanied by a man in a dark suit. In the bottom corner was a handwritten date, October 3rd, the same damn date that had been haunting me from every direction. Turning the sheet over, there was a note in all caps. Do not repeat the mistake. The following pages were a collection of familiar fragments, newspaper clippings similar to the ones I kept myself, but with additional notes, red arrows, comments that weren't mine. There were even copies of text messages between my son and me, private messages that no one else should have access to. The intruder not only knew our story, but he followed it closely, as if he were sitting at the table with us at every meal, writing down every word spoken or unsaid. A feeling of nausea washed over me, and I had to brace myself on the table to keep from falling. Then I heard the sound, a quiet popping sound coming from the master bathroom, the kind of sound that could have simply been a pipe expanding with the temperature change, but in this context, it sounded like pent-up breathing. I clutched the briefcase to my chest like a shield and walked toward the half-open bathroom door, feeling the cooler air escape through the crack. I pushed slowly, and what I saw was even more disturbing. On the sink, carefully placed, was a simple cell phone, the kind with large buttons, designed only for calls and texts. The screen was lit up, displaying a single sentence in capital letters, "Answer when ringing." The object emitted a low, constant hum, as if it were already in touch with another dimension. I felt a wave of chills run down my spine, and I took a step back, bumping my leg against the edge of the bed. It was at that moment that the phone vibrated. Not the cell phone on the sink, but my own, forgotten in the pocket of my soaked coat. The shock almost made me drop it, but I managed to answer before it hit the floor. The screen displayed again. No identification. I pressed it to my ear, and the voice that came out chilled me to the bone. It wasn't my son's, nor a stranger's. It was the voice of my husband, missing for so many years, saying with an almost paternal calm, "You took a while, but you're here." My entire body refused to accept what my ears were absorbing. "It can't be you," I whispered, my heart pounding. On the other end, the sluggish breathing continued. "I've always been here, watching. It's not me you should fear. It's him." The sound of the call began to distort, as if it were transmitting through a forbidden frequency. Before I could ask more, the line dropped, leaving only the hollow beep of the dead line. I fell to my knees on the edge of the bed, feeling the mattress give way under my weight and dampness. My eyes didn't know where to look: at the folder on the table, at the cell phone on the sink, or at the door that remained locked behind me. The feeling of being trapped was almost physical, as if invisible chains tied me to the four corners of that room. And then the sound broke the silence again. 3 sharp knocks on the door, rhythmic like a code. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice breaking. No answer, just 3 more knocks, exactly the same. I struggled to my feet, trying to control my panic, and approached the door. I looked through the peephole, but my vision was blurred by the condensation from the rain outside. All I saw was a fuzzy, motionless shadow. I recoiled instinctively, as if the peephole were an abyss ready to swallow me. I returned to the desk and rummaged through the folder, searching for something else. Among the pages, I found a small envelope sealed with red wax. The seal bore the letter H, written in an old-fashioned style. I broke the seal with my fingernail and removed the contents. A single typed sheet which read in cold mechanical lines, "Your absence is our greatest security. Your presence, our greatest risk. Decide whose side you are on." The words pierced me like knives. Who was we? Who had the power to dictate my presence in my own son's life as a threat? The questions multiplied in my mind like mirrors before mirrors, and each answer seemed more distant than before. I felt anger override fear, a heat that ran through my arms until my fists hardened. I stood up again and walked to the suite's window. I slowly opened the curtains, and below, in the dark parking lot, I saw the car that had followed me still parked. The headlights were off now, but I knew someone was watching me from inside, and as if to confirm my suspicion, the interior light flickered on for a brief second, revealing the silhouette of a person holding something. Maybe a phone, maybe a camera. I returned to the center of the room and stared at the 2 red folders. Mine and the other, cursed twins telling the same story through different hands. I felt like I was playing a game in which my own weapons were being used against me. Every clipping, every note, every memory I had gathered with such desperation was now being mirrored by someone who knew the same pain, but with dark intentions. It was then that my cell phone rang again. This time, I didn't answer right away. I watched the screen flash, mesmerized by the name that finally appeared clearly. Eduardo. My husband's name. The same one who had been missing since that fateful October 3rd. The same one who, theoretically, couldn't be calling me. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone, but I answered, slowly bringing it to my ear. "Don't be alarmed," the voice said, firm, but filled with a strange melancholy. "Everything you've seen so far is just the beginning. He already knows you're here, and he won't forgive you." Before I could ask who he was, the line dropped again. This time, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the sound of a doorknob turning outside the door. I stood still, my eyes fixed on the door, which was now moving slowly, as if someone were about to enter without asking permission. The thin air filled my lungs like smoke, and I realized there was no escape. The confrontation I'd so dreaded was just a step away, ready to reveal the truth that had been haunting me since the first note. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't just my son's marriage that was at stake anymore. It was the survival of our entire history. The doorknob turned slowly, almost theatrically, as if whoever was outside wanted me to hear each metallic click and prepare for the inevitable. My entire body went rigid, and my throat felt dry, as if I'd swallowed dust. I knew running wasn't an option. Behind me, only a tall window and a room with no alternative exits. I rested my hand on the red folder as if it could serve as a weapon or a shield, and held my breath, waiting for the moment when the door would finally open. When the crack opened, the light from the hallway entered like a yellow blade, cutting through the dimness of the suite. The shadow that appeared was large, wider than any silhouette I had imagined. But before I could make out a face, the door was pushed open, revealing not a stranger, but the bride. Yes, the bride herself, soaked, her dress stained with mud, her hair disheveled, her eyes filled with a panic I had never seen in anyone. She hurried inside, closed the door behind her, and leaned against it, panting, as if she'd fled from something or someone. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but her voice sounded less like an accusation and more like a desperate warning. I stared at her, trying to remain firm, but my own voice cracked as I asked, "What's going on? Where's my son?" She walked over to the table and placed her hand on the second red folder, as if to stop me from touching it again. "He tried to protect you, but now everything's at risk," she murmured. Her words were tinged with haste, but also with resignation. I leaned closer, ignoring the fear burning in my stomach, and said, "Tell me straight away. What are you talking about?" For a moment she seemed to be waging an internal battle. Her lips trembled, and her tear-filled eyes sought support in mine. Then she whispered, "He didn't disappear. He never disappeared. And today, he came back." I knew exactly who she was talking about, and the name echoed within me before I could even say it. Eduardo, my son's father. The man who, until that moment, I believed was dead or buried in some secret that would never be revealed. My knees buckled, and I had to lean against the edge of the bed to keep from falling. "Did you see him?" I asked, breathless. She nodded, her eyes wide. "He's here, not at the wedding, but nearby, watching, controlling. He never left, just hid. And now he doesn't want you to ruin what he's built." The room seemed to spin around me. All the loose ends in my mind began to align. The car following me, the voice on the phone, the crucifix hanging from the rearview mirror. Eduardo was behind it all, and my son somehow knew. "He called me," he said, his voice shaking. 2 minutes ago. He said he wasn't the one I should fear. But if it wasn't him, who?" The bride took a deep breath, as if about to plunge into icy water. "It's not just him. There's someone else, someone who helped him disappear, who kept everything running in the shadows, and that someone is closer than you think." Her eyes locked with intensity, and for a second I had the impression she was referring to herself. Before I could press her, we heard footsteps in the hallway. Steady, rhythmic footsteps approaching the suite. She ran to the window and looked out, as if assessing the possibility of escape. I remained still, feeling my throat close up. Then, in a quick gesture, she grabbed my hand and whispered, "If he comes in, don't say anything, just trust me." The sound of the key turning in the lock filled the room with tension. Unlike the previous time, this time it was a decisive, authoritative entrance. The door swung open, and the figure that appeared there took my breath away. It was my son, dressed as a groom, but with a somber look in his eyes, burdened with a weight that had nothing to do with happiness. He entered slowly, closed the door behind him, and faced first his fiancée, then me. The silence that fell was so thick, it felt palpable. "Mom," he finally said, his voice deep and firm, "I asked you not to come. I asked for a reason." I felt tears burn in my eyes, but I didn't break down. "I couldn't stay out of it. You know that. What's going on? Why is this folder here? Why is Eduardo alive?" My words came out in a rush, each one like a shot to the wall he was trying to build between us. He sighed, rubbing his face with his hands, as if carrying an unbearable weight. "I found out the truth months ago. He never really disappeared. He was hiding, waiting, and I had to make a deal with him." The revelation hit me like a bolt of lightning, leaving my nerves frayed. The bride beside me looked away as if she already knew everything. "A deal?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What kind of deal?" He hesitated, his eyes filled with torment, and finally answered, "To protect you, to protect all of us. But now, with you here, he'll know I didn't keep my end of the bargain. And that could cost him dearly. Thunder boomed outside, shaking the windows. With each word, I felt the distance between mother and son become an abyss. The red folder on the table was proof that Eduardo had never given up on us. He had simply turned us into pieces in a game we didn't yet understand. "You don't understand, Mom," my son continued, his voice thick with pain. "He doesn't just want to control me. He wants you back. He wants the whole family, as if nothing ever happened, and I don't know how far he's willing to go to get it." The words echoed in my mind like death knells. The man I loved, the father of my child, was alive. But it wasn't a redemptive return. It was a threat. A shadow that had been creeping into our lives unnoticed. And now, standing before the door to Suite 14, I understood that marriage was only the surface of a much deeper and more dangerous game. I approached him, touched his arm, and felt the tremor that ran through his skin. "You don't have to face him alone," I whispered. But before he could respond, the phone on the sink vibrated again, illuminating the bathroom with its greenish screen. The 3 words that appeared were like a fatal blow. "I am here." At that moment, I realized the real confrontation was no longer far away. It had already begun, and Eduardo was closer than ever. The cell phone vibrating in the bathroom seemed to pulse with the silence that settled over the suite, a heavy, suffocating silence, as if the air itself were afraid to move. The screen glowed with those 3 words, "I am here," that echoed in my mind as if etched in iron. My son looked away, unable to look at me, while the bride clutched her dress to her body, as if trying to hide within herself. I approached the bathroom slowly, each step feeling heavy as lead, until I reached for my cell phone. The cold surface of the device burned against my palm, and for a moment I considered throwing it against the wall, destroying that presence that haunted us. But deep down, I knew it would be pointless. Destroying the device wouldn't destroy the voice behind it. The message still blinked insistently, as if mocking my helplessness. I took a deep breath, and against every instinct of self-preservation, typed a reply. "Where are you?" I pressed send and stared at the screen, my heart racing, waiting for a reply that could change everything. The answer came almost instantly, as if he were already looking over my shoulder. "Closer than you think." Reading that, a chill ran down my spine, and I turned my head to the window, certain I'd see a silhouette watching me from outside. The parking lot was empty, only the dark car still parked with its tinted windows. But I knew he was there somewhere, invisible and yet omnipresent. My son approached, snatched the phone from my hand with a brusque gesture, and turned off the screen. "You shouldn't have answered," he said, his voice thick with disapproval and fear. "Now he's going to come here." I felt a wave of anger rise, mixed with the helplessness that had been eating away at me for years. "And what did you want me to do? Stay silent forever? Pretend I didn't hear the voice of my own husband, the man who abandoned me?" My voice came out louder than I intended, reverberating off the walls of the suite. The bride stepped between us, her hands raised as if trying to break up a fight. "Please, not now. If you fight, he'll win before you even show up. That's what he wants, to divide us." Her teary eyes stared at me with a strange sincerity, as if she were as frightened as I was, but at the same time convinced she knew more than she was letting on. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't just an innocent pawn in this plot. She was in it, up to her neck. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway again, this time heavier, more resolute, like boots crushing the silence. My son ran to the door, pressed his ear against it, and returned pale. "It's him." The 3 words sounded like a sentence. My heart hammered in my chest, and for the first time in years, I felt like the entire past was about to crash through. That door, with all the fury of a shadow never buried. Without a second thought, I grabbed the red folder on the table and pressed it to my chest. If it's him, I want to look him in the eye. I want to hear from him why he did all this. My son tried to stop me, but the bride grabbed his arm and said, "Let her, she needs it." It was the first time I heard firmness in her voice, and I realized there was more strength in this woman than I'd imagined. The doorknob turned, and the metallic click was like the crack of a gun being cocked. The door opened slowly, and a shadow filled the space. The light from the hallway first outlined the silhouette of his tall body, then the outline of his broad shoulders, and finally, the face I never thought I'd see again in the flesh. Eduardo. The same cold gaze, the same calculated half-smile, but now marked by wrinkles and scars that hadn't existed before. For a moment, time froze. I stared at him like a materialized ghost. The smell of rain and tobacco wafted in with him, mingling with the lavender scent that permeated the room. "You've grown up," he said, looking first at his son, then at me. His voice was calm, almost paternal, yet laced with venom. "But you still need me." My son took a step back, his fists clenched. "You shouldn't be here. You promised you wouldn't show up." Eduardo laughed, a short, metallic laugh that made the air seem heavier. "Promises, my son, are currency that only holds value as long as they serve their purpose, and my purpose has changed." I looked at him, my heart aflame, and couldn't help but say, "You destroyed everything. You left us. You made your silence a prison for both of us, and now you come back as if you own everything." My voice was thick with years of resentment, and for a moment I saw a flash of anger in his eyes before they closed again in coldness. "No, dear," he replied sarcastically. "I never left anything. I was always here, in the shadows making. Sure, they didn't fall apart. You just didn't know it." His words were knives, and each one seemed to twist inside me. My son took a step forward, his face drawn, and said, "Caring? That's not caring, that's controlling." Eduardo raised his hand, signaling silence, and pointed to the red folder in my hand. "I see you've also put away your collection. Interesting. The truths you sought have been with me for a long time. You simply retold the story I wanted you to find." He smiled, and in that smile was cruel triumph. The bride, previously silent, stepped forward. "If that's true, then why did it all come to this? Why now?" Edward looked at her with calculated disdain. "Because today is the day we seal a new pact. A marriage isn't just between two people, but between families. And that family needs me. Back." My blood boiled. "You think you can just come back and dictate rules as if no time had passed, as if the ghosts you left behind didn't exist?" Eduardo leaned in close, so close I could feel his hot breath, and murmured, "The ghosts only exist because you feed them. I never stopped being alive, never stopped pulling the strings. I was just waiting for the right moment." My son stepped between us like a human barrier, breathing heavily. "Enough. If you want something, say it now, but don't touch it." Eduardo raised his eyebrows, as if amused by this bravery. "Calm down, kid. I didn't come to fight. I came to negotiate." The silence that followed was more terrifying than any scream. Negotiate. That word carried an invisible weight, as if the price were something none of us were prepared to pay. Eduardo walked to the table, opened the second red folder, and spread. "The pages out on the surface. Here is the evidence of what happened, of what could still happen, and how together we can transform all of this into power." My breath quickened and anger burned alongside fear. "You will not use my son. Not today, not ever." But Eduardo just stared at me, his eyes shining like ice in the light. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about choice. It's already done. He's already decided." I turned to my son, searching his eyes for denial, for a sign of resistance. But what I found was hesitation. A hesitation that shattered me into 1,000 pieces. The hesitation in my son's gaze pierced me like an invisible blade. It was a brief hesitation, but enough to show me that Eduardo wasn't just imposing his presence. He had already planted roots in his own son's mind. My stomach lurched, my air grew thin, and for the first time I feared not only my husband's return, but the very real possibility that I had lost my son to him without even realizing it. Eduardo smiled with that sharp cynicism, as if he'd sensed my weakness, and spread more papers from his briefcase across the table, displaying them like cards from a poisoned deck. The pages revealed contracts, bank statements, transaction records I'd never seen before. Some were signed with my son's name, others with initials belonging to Eduardo. It all seemed like a web of commitments, favors, debts, as if they'd been involved in shady dealings long before that night. "Do you think he obeys you out of pity, Maria?" Eduardo's voice rang with cruel calm. "He's already with me, because he understands that blood is stronger than any cheap morality you preach." My son lowered his head, avoiding my gaze, and that hurt more than any insult. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice breaking. "You were part of this?" He opened his mouth to answer, but his fiancée stepped forward, placing herself between us. "Don't believe everything he tells you. Those papers don't tell the whole story. They're half-truths, concocted to confuse you." Her courage surprised me, and for a moment I saw in her a reflection of myself years ago, when I still believed I could face Eduardo. But Eduardo laughed, a deep laugh that filled the room like smoke. "You speak as if you know something, girl. And you do, don't you? After all, you have your part in this play too." He walked toward the bride, his gaze sharp as a razor. "You think I don't know who your father is. You think I don't know your lineage. You're not just some innocent bride who fell into the sky. You're heir to a secret that intersects with mine." The bride's expression changed. Her eyes welled up, but not with fear. There was recognition there, as if a secret door had opened before her. "So you know," she murmured. "You've known all along." Eduardo inclined his head triumphantly. "Of course I know. That's why I allowed this marriage. It's not a union of love, it's a union of blood, of power." My heart sank at that. So the marriage, from the beginning, wasn't just about my son and that woman. It was part of a larger web, a merging of families and secrets that stretched back to Eduardo. I felt the walls of the suite closing in around me, as if we were all trapped inside a dark theater, acting out roles he'd already written. "You used my son as a bargaining chip," I accused, my voice thick with anger. Eduardo gave me a cold, almost pitying look. "I used all of you, Maria, because you never knew how to play the game. While I was searching for truths in newspaper clippings, I was constructing realities with steady hands. And now the moment has come to choose: join me or disappear with me." The silence that followed was brutal. The only sound was the rain beating against the window, like impatient fingers drumming against the glass. My son was breathing heavily, his face pale, his eyes torn between me and him. It was as if he were standing between two worlds, unable to decide which one he belonged to. I wanted to shake him, remind him of when he was just a boy who asked me to read him bedtime stories, but I couldn't move a muscle. The bride then lifted her chin and spoke firmly. "I will not allow you to decide our fate, Eduardo. Not mine, not his." She slid her hand into the pocket of her dress and removed a small silver flash drive, which gleamed in the dim light of the room. "The whole truth is here. All the recordings, all the messages, all the proof of what you have done these years. I'm not your hostage. I never have been." Eduardo's face darkened, and for a moment the cold control he had displayed seemed to waver. "You wouldn't have the courage," he hissed, but his bride didn't back down. "I already had enough courage to marry the son of the man who destroyed my family. Now I have the courage to expose your every word to the world." My son's eyes widened in surprise, and he looked at me as if demanding an explanation for a puzzle he'd never imagined existed. I was also astonished. I knew nothing about his fiancée's past, nor about this silent war she was waging against Eduardo. But seeing her firm stance, I understood that perhaps she was the only one capable of facing him without being torn apart by the emotional memory that still bound me to him. Eduardo took a step back, but quickly regained his venomous smile. "You think you've gained something from this? That flash drive isn't a threat, it's just bait. If it's exposed, it won't just be me who goes down. You all go down together. Your names, your connections, your weaknesses. I made sure of that. When I go down, I drag everyone down with me." The tension in the room was unbearable. I could feel sweat trickling down the back of my neck, mixed with the chill of the air that seemed to freeze my bones. Fear, mingled with anger and the certainty that there was no clean way out, began to take hold. Either we gave in to him, or we entered a battlefield where we would all be destroyed. My son finally broke the silence, his voice deep, almost a roar. "Enough! I won't be your puppet, father, nor a sham husband in your game. If you think you can control me, you're mistaken." Eduardo stared at him with a strange gleam, as if somewhere between pride and menace. "You speak like a man, but you're still a boy, and boys pay dearly for defying their father." Time seemed to compress in that instant. The bride held the flash drive like a weapon. I had the red folder clutched to my chest, and my son stood in front of us like a human shield. Eduardo, however, remained calm, confident, as if he knew he already had the pieces on the board under control. Suddenly, the simple cell phone on the sink vibrated again. The screen lit up on its own, and a new message appeared. "Time's up." We all turned at once, and the greenish glow illuminated our tense faces. Edward smiled but said nothing. He just let the silence be more menacing than any words. I felt my entire body tremble. The message seemed to be for all of us, not just me, as if the invisible clock that had been ticking that night had reached its end. And deep in my chest, I knew the real showdown was about to begin, and no one would emerge unscathed. The phrase, "Time's up," continued to pulse on my phone screen like an artificial heartbeat inside that room, and the sound of the rain seemed to follow suit, each drop falling like a repeated warning. I felt the atmosphere suddenly change, as if the air had thickened, becoming almost impossible to breathe. Eduardo didn't move. He just watched, with that enigmatic smile of someone who could already predict our every reaction. My son reached for his cell phone and, with a brusque gesture, turned it off. The sharp click of the button was like a muffled gunshot. "We're not going to follow your rules anymore," he said, trying to sound firm, though his breath betrayed the fear that still gnawed at him. Eduardo raised an eyebrow, as if appreciating the spectacle of an amateur actor trying to take on a role larger than he can handle. "You still don't get it," he murmured. "I don't need you to follow my rules. I am the rules." The silence was suddenly broken by a loud knock on the suite door, 3 heavy blows that made the walls tremble. The bride swallowed hard and gripped the flash drive even tighter, as if it were her last weapon. I instinctively approached the door, but Eduardo calmly raised his hand and said, "Don't open it. It's not for you." The way he said it chilled my blood, because he seemed to know exactly who was outside, as if he'd arranged the meeting. The knocking repeated, louder, accompanied by a deep voice that pierced the wood. "Open now." I would recognize that timbre anywhere. It wasn't a stranger, it wasn't an unlikely ally. It was the same voice I'd heard on the phone hours before, distorted by interference, but now clear, crisp, cutting. My heart raced. Eduardo wasn't alone. There was someone else. My son pulled me by the arm, pulling me away from the door as the doorknob began to move. "He won't stop until he's in," he whispered. Eduardo, however, merely took a few steps back and leaned against the wall, crossing his arms as if watching a scene he'd planned. "Let him in." After all, he's entitled to his share too. The door burst open, slamming against the wall, and a figure stepped into the glare of the storm. Tall, in a soaked overcoat, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hood. When he raised his head, I saw scars crisscrossing his face, and his eyes that held both hatred and pain. The shock paralyzed me. I knew him. It wasn't Eduardo, but someone connected to him, someone who bore our marks. The bride was the first to react, her voice trembling but firm. "It can't be—" Her entire body recoiled, as if she'd seen a ghost. The man stared at her intently, and a low laugh escaped his lips. "You always knew I'd come back." She let the flash drive slip from her hands for a moment, but quickly retrieved it, clutching it tightly. "Who is he?" I asked desperately, looking from one to the other. Eduardo replied with the calm of someone telling an old story. "He's the part of the equation you never wanted to see, Maria. The son born not from your womb, but from my silence. The brother your boy never knew he had. My world collapsed in that instant. I felt the ground slip away from under my feet, the air drain from my lungs. A brother? Eduardo had another son. My real son's eyes widened in disbelief, as if staring at his own distorted reflection. "That's a lie," he said, his voice breaking, but the scars on the newcomer's face and the cruel gleam in his eyes said otherwise. There was truth to it. The stranger, or rather, the hidden brother, took a few steps toward us, each step echoing like a sentence. "I spent years in the shadows, forgotten, used. Now it's my turn, and I won't leave here empty-handed." His gaze settled first on me, then on his fiancée, and finally on my son, as if he were evaluating pieces on a chessboard. Eduardo remained motionless, letting the silence stretch on until it became unbearable. Then finally he spoke. "You now have two choices. Accept the truth and unite, or destroy each other in the face of it. Family always returns to itself, whether it likes it or not." My body trembled, but I found the strength to say, "Family isn't blood, Eduardo. Family is loyalty, it's love, and you never knew what that means." My eyes filled with tears, but my voice didn't break. For the first time, I felt like I was no longer running from him but facing him. The hidden brother laughed, a bitter laugh. "Fine words, but words sustain no one. I lived on shadows, on scraps, while you had a life. Now my time has come, and I will take what is mine, whatever the cost." The room seemed to shrink, as if the walls were closing in on us, compressing our bodies into an ever smaller space. The storm outside raged, and the lights flickered, threatening to go out. The flash drive gleamed in the bride's hand, the red folder weighed heavily against my chest, and my son's eyes burned with a mix of anger and confusion. Suddenly the light flashed 3 times and then went out completely. We were plunged into total darkness, with only the lightning illuminating, for a split second, our tense faces. The sound of everyone's breathing mingled, heavy, uneven. I knew something terrible was about to happen. In the darkness, a voice rang, out low and venomous, but I couldn't tell who it belonged to. "Someone isn't going to get out of this night alive." And in that moment, I understood that the night wasn't just about secrets, it was about survival. Darkness swallowed every corner of the suite like a ravenous beast, and the heavy silence was replaced by rapid breathing, shuffling footsteps, and the creaking of the wooden floor. My heart hammered so loudly it seemed to echo throughout the room. I couldn't see faces, only shadows, silhouetted by the flashes of lightning that periodically flashed through the window, transforming us into frozen statues for a split second. The first distinct sound was of breaking glass. Something fell to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces, and the acrid smell of old wine filled the air, mingling with lavender and rust. The bride let out a muffled scream, but immediately afterward I heard the metallic thud of the flash drive hitting something hard. It had slipped from her hand, now lost in the darkness. "Don't let him get it." My son's voice pierced the darkness. Desperate, I instinctively knelt, groping the ground with trembling hands, searching for that small piece of metal that held secrets greater than all of us. The cold, wine-soaked floor dripped through my fingers, and each shard threatened to cut me. Suddenly, a rough hand gripped my wrist tightly. I flinched, trying to pull away, but the voice that followed made my blood run cold. "Leave it, Maria. This doesn't belong to you." It was Eduardo. He was so close, I could feel the heat of his breath against my face. My instincts screamed to push him away, and with a sudden movement, I pushed his arm away and rolled to the side, feeling the pain of a thin cut tear through my palm. The next clap of thunder illuminated the scene for a moment. My son struggled with the shadow of his hidden brother, bodies crashing against the wall, while the bride knelt in despair, groping on the floor for the flash drive. Eduardo, for his part, watched me with that cold smile, as if nothing of it affected him, as if I were merely a conductor directing a chaotic orchestra. I groped on the floor again, and miraculously my fingers touched the cold metal of the flash. Drive! I clutched it with all my remaining strength and hid it against my chest. "I found it!" I screamed, but immediately felt a violent impact against my back. I was thrown against the edge of the bed, the breath knocked from my lungs. The hidden brother towered over me, his insane gaze shining with a new flash of lightning. "This is mine," he growled, trying to snatch the flash drive from my hands. Pain burned in my arms as I resisted, but anger gave me strength I didn't know I had. "None of this is yours," I replied, my voice cracking. He pushed harder, and the bed creaked under the weight of the struggle. It was then that my son appeared, pulling him by the shoulders and slamming him against the wall. The impact knocked the lamp bulb off, scattering sparks that illuminated the room for seconds. The bride rushed to me, helping me up. Her eyes were filled with tears, but there was also determination. "We have to get out of here now, while he hasn't regained control." I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts, but Eduardo spoke loudly, his voice dominating the room. "You're not going anywhere. If you leave, the whole truth will come out, and no one will survive it." His words hit me like invisible blows. For a moment, I considered giving in, handing over the flash drive and ending this torture. But then I looked at my son, who, even wounded, stood between me and his hidden brother, and I realized there was no retreat. "I'd rather die knowing the truth than live in your theater of lies," I replied, my voice echoing in the room. The silence that followed was broken by the metallic sound of something being pulled. When everyone's eyes turned, we saw Eduardo with a gun in his hand, pointed directly at me. The barrel reflected the flashes of lightning, and in that instant, I realized he wasn't bluffing. This man hadn't returned for conversation. He had returned to dominate, no matter the cost. "Maria, hand it over," he said calmly, as if asking a trivial favor. "You know you have no choice." The weight of the gun turned every word into a sentence. I trembled, but I didn't let go of the flash drive. My son took a step forward, his eyes blazing. "If you shoot her, you'll never have me." "Not today, not ever," Eduardo chuckled, shaking his head. "Do you still believe you can choose, boy? I chose for you a long time ago." The sound of the gun's hammer being pulled echoed through the room, and the bride let out a sob. I clutched the flash drive to my chest and closed my eyes, feeling the salty taste of tears trickle down my cheeks. But before the shot could be fired, another sound cut through the air. Sirens, distant but growing ever closer. Blue and red light began to flicker through the window, casting distorted shadows on the walls. Eduardo's eyes widened for a moment in surprise. Then he glared at his fiancée. "It was you." She didn't deny it. "Yes. I called before I came, and they know everything." Her voice was shaking, but her courage was undeniable. Eduardo gritted his teeth, and for a moment the control he'd so often displayed seemed to crumble. He knew he was cornered. The hidden brother roared with rage and charged at my son again, knocking over chairs and papers in his path. The room turned into a battlefield, pure chaos, as hurried footsteps echoed through the inn's corridors. The police were coming, and we all knew the outcome would now be inevitable, cruel. Eduardo's gun was still pointed at me, and the flash drive burned in my hands as if it were made of embers. Everything I had feared, avoided, and silenced for years was before me, concentrated in a single moment of decision. Past, present, and future compressed into that instant. And I understood that it no longer mattered who would survive or who would fall. The only thing left was to reveal the truth, whatever the cost. The sirens wailed louder and louder, cutting through the storm like sonic blades, and the mix of blue and red light projected through the cracks in the window, painting the room with warning colors. Eduardo, still with the gun pointed at me, didn't blink. His face remained cold, but sweat trickled down his temples, the first sign that control was finally slipping away from him. He knew the police were about to knock on the door. The hidden brother didn't back down. He continued to wrestle with my son, punching and shoving in the darkness until one of them hit the wall, and the loud bang sent the lamp falling, shattering into shiny shards on the floor. The smell of gunpowder seemed to permeate the air, even though the shot hadn't been fired. It was as if the imminent violence was enough to scar everything around. "Eduardo, it's over," the bride said firmly, the flash drive still in her hand. Her fingers were trembling, but her eyes burned with unexpected courage. "The police know. If you shoot, you won't just destroy your family, you'll condemn yourself forever." He laughed, a low, gravelly, almost animalistic laugh. "Do you really believe that evidence on a flash drive will destroy me? You're too naive. I've already created alternative versions, ready-made narratives. When they walk through this door, the one who looks guilty won't be me. It'll be you." He pointed the gun at his fiancée, and for a moment I thought he was going to shoot for real. My instincts took over. I threw myself at him, pushing his hand aside. The shot exploded, deafening, ricocheting off the ceiling and scattering dust across the room. The smell of gunpowder was real now, burning my nostrils and bringing back memories I'd wanted to bury. Eduardo lost his balance, but still held the gun steady. "You've always been impulsive, Maria," he said through gritted teeth, "and that's what will destroy you." Meanwhile, my son managed with effort to pin his hidden brother against the wall. Blood dripped from a cut on his eyebrow, but his expression was fierce. "If you are truly my brother, know that I will not let you destroy the only thing I have left, my mother." The silence that followed between them was deeper than any scream. His brother only smiled grimly, spitting on the ground before muttering, "Then die together." The sirens stopped outside. The sound of squad car doors opening and hurried footsteps echoed in the parking lot. Eduardo turned sharply toward the door, panting, and I seized the moment to kick the gun, which slipped under the bed. He gave me a look full of hatred, but also surprise. For the first time that night, he was no longer in command. The bride held the flash drive high in the air. "If they come in now, I'll hand it over. Everything you've built will crumble in seconds. You no longer have power over us." Eduardo clenched his fists, his chest heaving, and shouted, "You don't know what you're doing. This flash drive isn't just about me, it's about you too. When they see what's inside, there will be no marriage, no family, only ruins." The knocking on the door began. "Police, open immediately!" The authoritative voice reverberated through the room, bringing a new level of tension. My son pulled away from his brother, still on guard, and gave me a look that said it all. It was time to choose between exposing the truth or trying to save what was left. Eduardo raised his arms slowly, as if to surrender, but his eyes never left mine. "Maria, think about it. Do you really want to carry this guilt? Do you want to see your own son dragged along in the mud?" His every word was a poison that tried to corrode my last convictions. I trembled, but I took a deep breath. "It's not my fault. It's yours. It's always been yours." The hidden brother lunged forward again, trying to grab his fiancée and snatch the flash drive from her hands, but my son intervened, shoving him violently against the cabinet. The impact was so strong that the wood cracked and a cloud of dust rose into the air. The sound of the struggle, the screams, the pounding of the rain, and the incessant pounding on the door made the atmosphere unbearable, as if the world were about to collapse. The bride, crying, held out the flash drive to me. "It's your decision, no one else's. It's your story, your pain, your chance to end this." My hands shook as I took it, and the cold metal felt like a ton of weight. Outside, the voices of the police were already shouting that they were going to break down the door. Eduardo took a step toward me, still without a weapon, but with the presence of a predator who doesn't need teeth to intimidate. "If you hand this over, you lose everything. The son you protected so much will hate you. I'll make sure of it. You don't understand the game, Maria. You never have." Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't erase the resolve building within me. I lifted the flash drive, taking a deep breath, and faced my son. "Whatever it is, we need to know. We need to end the shadows." He, still panting, simply nodded, even though his eyes were filled with pain. The suite door burst open, shattering. The lock and armed men burst in, shining powerful flashlights in all directions. The light blinded my eyes for a moment, and I heard shouts of command. "Drop everything, hands up!" Eduardo slowly raised his arms, a half smile still plastered across his face, as if he believed that, even trapped, he was still victorious. Was surrounded by 2 police officers who asked me to hand over what I was holding. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open my fingers. When the flash drive passed from my hands to theirs, I felt as if I had released a part of my heart, a weight I had carried for years. But I also felt the fear that by opening that file, the world would collapse not only on Eduardo, but on all of us. My son ran to me, grabbed my shoulders, and looked me in the eye. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." His voice was firm, and in that instant I realized that despite all the lies, he was still my son. There was still something Eduardo hadn't been able to tear from us, the invisible connection that endured time, fear, and pain. The hidden brother was handcuffed, screaming and kicking like a cornered animal. Eduardo, in turn, was led away in silence, but not before giving me one last look. A look that said this story wouldn't end there, that his shadow would continue to haunt me even from behind bars. The red and blue lights still flashed through the window, and the rain washed the glass like tears from the sky itself. I knew we were one step away from the end, but also one step away from a revelation that could destroy everything. The flash drive was now in official hands, and soon the truth would come out. And for the first time in years, I didn't know if I wanted to listen. The rain was relentless as we were led into the inn's conference room, now transformed into a makeshift barracks. The sirens had stopped, but the intermittent flashing of red and blue lights still pierced the curtains, tinging the room with an air of inevitable judgment. I sat exhausted on a wooden chair, my hands still shaking as if the flash drive was still there, clutched against my chest. My son stood beside me, his forehead scarred with a cut, but his eyes fixed as if he had finally made up his mind. A stern-faced police officer placed the flash drive on the table and announced that they would open the files right there in front of everyone. My heart sank, as if every second before plugging in that small piece of metal was a suspended sentence. Eduardo, handcuffed in a corner of the room, watched everything with a cynical smile. "You want the truth? Prepare to drown in it." His words were a slow poison, and even handcuffed he seemed to dominate the room. The bride was pale but determined. She sat across the table, her hands clasped, as if in silent prayer. Her eyes met mine, and I realized that, despite her fear, there was a spark of hope in her eyes. She wanted this to end as much as I did, even if the price was too high. The hidden brother, on the other hand, remained handcuffed and furious, spewing insults every few minutes, but ignored by the police force. When the computer turned on and the screen flashed, my stomach dropped. The sharp click of the flash drive entering the USB port sounded like the clang of a blade. Utter silence fell over the room. Even the rain seemed to have slowed to audible. The first file opened and the images appeared. Hidden camera footage, records of meetings in dark rooms, recognizable voices conspiring over contracts, bribes, disappearances. Eduardo was in them all. My son held his breath. Each video showed not only Eduardo, but also powerful figures, people of influence in the city, some even known to us. This isn't just about you, my son said, his voice breaking. Eduardo laughed. I warned you. If I fall, everyone falls, including you. And then came the second blow. Among the documents were signatures that belonged to my son. Contracts that he, in his innocence or manipulation, had signed without realizing their true significance. I felt the pain cut deep into my chest. Is it true? I asked, looking at him. You participated? He lowered his head, tears streaming down his face. I didn't know, Mom. He made me believe it was to protect us, that the business was clean, that it was all about securing a future. I was blind. My soul split in two. Half wanted to hug him, the other wanted to scream. The bride stood up and pointed to the screen. That's what he does. He enriches himself at everyone's expense, manipulates, turns victims into accomplices without them realizing it. It was like that with me. It was like that with him. It was like that with you, Maria. This is Eduardo's empire. It's not made of money, but of invisible chains. Her voice echoed in the room, and for the first time I saw police officers look at each other, shocked. Eduardo leaned forward, his handcuffs jingling. You think the truth sets you free? The truth enslaves. Now everyone knows your dear son isn't so innocent. The marriage is over before it even began. You can't erase that. The venom in his words burned, but it couldn't shake what I felt. I held my son's hand, looked him in the eye, and said, making mistakes doesn't make you like him. What makes you different is choosing which side you want to be on now. He wept silently, but he squeezed my hand back, and in that gesture, I knew Eduardo hadn't won. No matter what the papers said, no matter how much he'd rigged the game, my son was still my son, and that bond hadn't been broken. The last file opened and the final revelation came like a collective blow. An audio recording, dated that fateful October 3rd, the date that haunted us. Eduardo's voice was clear, negotiating his own fake death with accomplices. She needs to believe I'm gone. Only then will I be able to rebuild everything without being watched. Disappearance will be the greatest weapon. The silence after that sentence was deafening. It was proven he had never been a victim. He had been the architect of all the pain. The police didn't hesitate. Eduardo was led away under heavy guard, but before leaving, he gave me a look that seemed to promise that even behind bars, he would find a way back. You'll never be free of me, Maria, he murmured, barely audible, but enough to echo in my mind. The hidden brother was also dragged out, still ranting. Only the three of us remained, me, my son, and the bride. Silence fell over us like a heavy curtain. The wedding hadn't happened, and perhaps never would. But something greater had been sealed. The liberation, however incomplete, from a shadow that had suffocated us for years. I looked at my son, who was still crying, and hugged him. We are not defined by the mistakes they inflict on us. We are defined by what we do afterward. The bride came closer and joined the embrace, forming a fragile but real circle of something Eduardo could never destroy, the love that arises in the midst of chaos. Outside, the storm was beginning to show signs of easing. The sky was still overcast, but the first rays of morning were appearing on the horizon. I took a deep breath and thought about how many years I had lived in the darkness, waiting for an answer that had now finally arrived. But the last doubt, the cruelest, still echoed in my mind. Does the truth truly set you free, or does it merely replace one prison with another? As the timid sun tried to break through the clouds, I knew that even free of Eduardo, I would never be free of the scars he left on us. The wedding didn't happen, but something greater was born that night. The certainty that even in the deepest darkness, we could still choose to be together, and that choice would be, forever, our form of revenge against him.